Hey everybody, welcome to another Daily Dose of Gatsby. Today we're on episode number 3. As always, I am Shane Thomas. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at smthomas3. Today we're going to be talking about how you can use Drupal as a backend data source to feed data or content into your Gatsby site. So we're going to look at it from the Drupal side and see how you have to set it up. It's really easy. We're also going to look at how you actually pull the data into Gatsby and create pages, and then how you can actually take the content from Drupal or the data and then display that on your page on your Gatsby site. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to want to make sure we have a Drupal site created. So I have a Drupal site here. It's using the default Drupal demo content. So you can see there's just a bunch of articles on it. If you already have a Drupal site, great, then you'll be fine. If you don't, you can go to pantheon.io and you can set up a free development site that'll work perfectly fine for pretty much anything you're going to be doing with Gatsby. And what we're going to do here is just take a look. One thing you're going to want to make sure of is, in our case, we have a content type called article. And on this article, we have a body field and a field image or image field. You're going to want those things in order to follow along. You're also going to need to turn on the JSON API module in Drupal. So you don't have to download any extra modules. It's all within core Drupal or the Drupal 8 core. Make sure you are using Drupal 8. And you just turn this module on and you're good to go. That's all you need to do as far as setup on the Drupal site. So in order to get this to work, we need to install a plugin on Gatsby. The plugin we need to install is the gatsby-source-drupal plugin. You can see right here, you can run npm install --save gatsby-source-drupal. So we're going to go ahead and do that. In my case, I'm using Yarn, which I recommend, but it doesn't matter. You can use npm, you can use Yarn. It's really a preference thing. So I'm just going to do yarn add gatsby-source-drupal. So I'm going to run that. It's going to install this gatsby-source-drupal plugin, and then we're going to have to actually configure it. So it's now installed. We're going to open up our project folder here, and we want to go to the Gatsby config file. So you remember, if you followed along last video, we actually learned how you can set different site metadata using Gatsby config. This is also where you go to configure your plugins. So we want to come down here and we're going to add just a new configuration for this plugin. We're going to resolve Gatsby source-drupal, and we're going to need to give it some options. The most important option we need is base URL, and we're going to paste the URL to our Drupal site in here, and that's all we're going to have to do to get it set up. So let's go back. The Drupal site is right here. We do want the trailing slash, I believe, and we will just paste it in there, and that's it. We can save this, and now it should allow us to connect our Gatsby site to our Drupal database. A couple things though. If we look at this documentation, you can see you can change the API base. So if you're using the JSON API extras module, which isn't a contributed module you'd have to download on your Drupal site, you can change it. Right by default, it's /JSON API. So you can actually see this data. If we go to /JSON API, you can see all the JSON data that's going to be fed into our Gatsby site. But that module, the JSON API extras module, allows you to change that. So there's a configuration option if you changed what API base path you wanted to use. You can add filters, which we're not going to do. You can also add basic auth. So this is useful if you have maybe a public Drupal site and you don't want all your content to be publicly viewable. For us, it's really a development site, so we could add I could, I'm not too worried about authorization, but you could easily add this information to add a username and password. It's really pretty simple. So that's it for that configuration. Let's go ahead and run Gatsby develop, and let's see if it actually can connect to our Drupal site. Okay, so that went ahead and loaded, and you can see everything didn't get any errors. Everything seemed to load fine. That's good. I'm going to open up this link right here that opens up our localhost 8000 __ GraphQL, and this will actually bring us to our graphical explorer. So let's go ahead and clear out that. So if you have anything in there, you can get rid of it. We're going to notice now that there's a lot of additional information here that we can query. So GraphQL is basically a query language for your APIs. So in this case, our API is going out to our Drupal site. So what I'm really looking for is I want to find, on my Drupal site, I want to find these article content types. So I want to find articles. You can see there's a number of articles here. I want to go ahead and pull those in. So in order to do that, I'm going to look for all node article. I want all of them. I want them to be in Drupal. They're called nodes, and it's called articles. So I want to grab all of the nodes, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the ID, the title, and I'll go into body and select processed, and I'll go ahead and run this. And you can see this one's called Give It a Go and Grow Your Own Herbs. Looks like there's a large body there. You can see this one works as well. So it's really pretty simple. It pulls in the ID, the title, and the actual process text from this body field. Let's also get the image. So your first instinct is going to be to go to field image. You can see all I can get is the alt, the height, or the width. I do want the alt text. But if you actually want the image data, you need to go into relationships. So because it's an external entity that links to our article entity or article content, it's in the relationships section here. And you want to go to field image. Let's go down to local file, and let's find public URL. So if we click run now, you can see it does pull in the alt text, and it does pull in a URL for our file. So this has all the data that we're going to need to pull in the content from our Drupal site into our Gatsby site. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to go back to our code editor. And anytime you want to basically create pages on your Gatsby site, you need to do it in your Gatsby node. So what this is going to allow us to do is during the initial Gatsby build, it's going to go through, we want to find all the articles, and we want to create a page for each of these articles. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we want to require path, and you'll see why this is useful in a minute. So if you just follow along here, I'll explain what we're doing. All right, so we are going to need to use this path here. We want to export, create pages. We're doing this asynchronously. And essentially this is kind of the wrapper you need. Once you set this up, you can, it's going to allow you to do everything you need to do in order to create these pages dynamically during the Gatsby build process. So what we want to do is we need that, and we're going to go ahead and create a constant for our articles. This is actually going to use GraphQL to pull in all our articles. And some of the syntax, if you're not familiar with more modern JavaScript is going to be a little bit maybe confusing at first, but as you start to go through it, you're going to start to understand what some of it's doing. So we actually want to paste in this GraphQL query from here, and we want to make sure we include all of these brackets. If we go back, we can paste it here. We'll just need to indent it a bit more. So that should work. Essentially what this is doing is this running this GraphQL query that we created. One thing we want to do here though is we don't actually want this data yet, and I'll explain why in a bit, but we don't want this data, and there's one thing we did miss. It'd be nice to get the path so we can use the path from our Drupal site. In order to do that, we just need to find path, then the alias, and now if I run it, you can see there's this path alias. So that's the actual path that we'll be able to access our article at. So I want to make sure I add that to my query as well. So it looks something like that. Now, what this is doing is this is just going to run our GraphQL right now. It's not actually doing anything yet. So we want to actually take this this articles variable that we're just creating, and we want to loop through this to map all of these articles to actual basically Gatsby pages. We want to tell Gatsby to go through this, create a page for each of these articles. So this is going to come back as articles.data. In this case, all node article dot nodes, and we're going to use the map function. So we'll just call it article data, something like that. And in here we want to go create page. So this is where it's actually calling the Gatsby create page function. And we need to pass in some data to this. So the first thing we're going to pass in is the path. And the reason the path is important is this is going to map to the path on our Drupal site. So we're going to do article data.path.alias, and this is just grabbed from this article data gets us basically to this point. We want the path, and then inside that we want the alias. We need to tell it what component to use. So this is where we use this the path that we required up here. So path.resolve, and we're going to resolve source/templates/article.js. And this doesn't exist yet. We're going to have to create this. So don't worry if you haven't seen that yet, because it doesn't exist. But that's actually going to tell it what template do you want to use when you're creating this page. And last but not least, we need to pass in the context. And the context is going to allow us to pass in data into this component, and what we want to call it is our article ID, and we're going to pass in article data.id, and so it's just going to pass in this ID here. Just make sure I close this out. So something like that, and that's all we're going to need in our Gatsby node file. Again, what this is doing is here it's running this GraphQL to get all this data. Here it's actually looping through that and creating a page for each article. It's creating a page at the path. It's going to use this component that we haven't created yet, and it's going to pass in the ID into this component. So let's go ahead and save that. And the next step is actually creating this article.js template. So in our source folder, I'm going to create templates/article.js. So it just creates a new folder, creates article.js in that folder. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to import React from React, because this is a React component. We're going to import prop types, and I'm going to explain what those are in a second. From prop types, and it's prop types, not prop type. Import GraphQL from Gatsby. So prop types are just a way to validate that the props or the data that you're getting passed in is what you're expecting. And we're going to use GraphQL, and you'll see why in just a minute. We also want to import our layout from our layout component. So we're going to create a React component. We're going to call it article. It's going to receive some data. And we'll fill that in a little bit. We're also going to want to make sure that we're validating the data that this article component is getting. So that's where prop types come in. So we're going to say article.proptypes. And it's going to receive data. And it's going to be proptypes.object.isRequired. So essentially what this is doing is it's saying we're getting some data. It's going to be an object, and we want it to be required. Now the next thing we want to do is we actually want to create a GraphQL query. And you might be wondering, well, why don't we just pull in all the information we need here? Well, this is kind of a pattern you can follow, and it makes each of these templates kind of self-contained. So all we need is the ID, and then with that ID we generate the entire article or the entire template from that one ID. And this is important, especially when you get into working with live preview, where you can actually save your content on your Drupal site and have it immediately viewable on your Gatsby site. Right now you have to rerun the Gatsby development server or the Gatsby build process each time to pull in the Drupal data. So if you do something like make a small title change or a body content change or image change on your Drupal site, you have to rerun the whole Gatsby development server or build process if you're actually if you have the site public. We don't necessarily want to have that. We want to make sure we can build it in a way that's going to support live preview. So it's just a slightly different pattern you can follow. So this is going to be a page query. So we're going to export a query, and it's going to be a GraphQL query. And here we need to pass in some data into this query. So we're going to pass in what we're going to call our article ID. So article ID, and that's going to have to match. If we take it just a step back, that's going to match this right here. So we're passing in article ID. It's going to be a string. And what we're actually going to query is our node article. So before it was all node articles, this is just node article. And we're going to filter the ID field and make sure that it is equal to this article ID. Now we need to go ahead and put in any of the data we want. And so if we go back to our GraphQL, we can pull everything here. We don't want the path, but we want to make sure we have the ID, the title, the body, the alt text for the field image, and then the actual public URL for this field image. So I'm just going to copy all this and go back, and should be able to paste it in here. And now this is going to get all my data, and it's going to be fed into this this article component here. At the bottom though, before we forget, make sure you export our article. So we export our component here. Now we actually need to build this component out. So everything in this component is going to come in as data.nodeArticle. So I'm just going to go ahead and create just a little helper constant here, just to simplify how I'm going to access this data. So now I can do post.title to get the title, post.body.process to get the processed body text, and we're going to just return. We're going to return a layout component, and that's using the layout component that we're importing here. We're going to do an h1, and we'll do post.title in our h1. Let's go ahead and do an image tag, and we'll go source and it's going to be post dot relationships dot field image dot local file dot public URL. So it's a little bit long, but it has to go down this whole process. So relationships, field image, local file, public URL. The alt text is going to be post dot field image dot alt. And then so one thing to note here is we really should be using Gatsby's image component rather than just an HTML image. We'll cover that in the future. It's just a little bit, there's a few extra things you can do, a little bit more complicated to get set up. It's the recommended way. This way will work, and it'll be good for an example, but just keep in mind you should look into how to use Gatsby image before you actually push this live. So we'll go ahead and create, probably just a wrapper div would be fine. And we want to call this really scary name here called dangerously set inner HTML. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to set actual HTML content. And we're going to need to do HTML, and we need to pass in the HTML content that we want. So it's going to look something like that. And so that's just going to create a div. We're going to put our HTML in that div. So it'll paste our body process text basically in that div. And that's all we should need to do here. Let's go ahead and add our semicolon there. And let's save it. Now, ideally this would work. So if I didn't mess anything up, I'm going to shut down my Gatsby development server and rerun it. And it should load everything in. So again, it's going to go through. You can see it's saying it's fetching data from Drupal. Before it said that it had created 6 pages. This time it said it created 14 pages. So that's good. I like that. Let's go ahead and go back to our Drupal site and let's find this page here. So you can see it's /articles / let's hear it for carrots. Don't worry about the language code if you're using the Drupal demo. The language code isn't actually passed in. Now if we go to our website and we were going to add that to the end, ta-da, we got it. All right, so this is pulling in this content from this page. You can see it's the same image, same text, everything looks good. Now if I wanted to change this on the Drupal side, if I changed this title for instance and I edited this, I would have to rerun that Gatsby develop server. So that's kind of inconvenient. We'll talk about how you can use live preview in a future episode. That's it for this time on the Daily Dose of Gatsby. It was a little bit long, but we learned how you can actually configure a Drupal site. You can use gatsby-source-drupal to pull in that data, and you can, in this case, we pulled in a bunch of articles. So go ahead and try it out. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments on YouTube. And make sure you are following me on Twitter. Make sure you signed up for the Code Karate newsletter. And make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel here. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.